Our next guest is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. Esther, fabulous to have you back. Look, we know the Royals had a big spending year, but they've also had a big earning year. That means less money from the taxpayer, right?
Yes, it does. So obviously, one of the big arguments that Republicans have made about the royal family is how much they cost the public. And they don't believe that this institution should be receiving funds from the public in the way that they do from the sovereign grant. And this, the money that they'll be receiving from that is going down from 25% of net profits for the institution to 12%. But actually, the firm is more profitable this year thanks to their offshore wind farms, which is actually quite ironic because it's very on brand for the king. It's a green initiative, and the royal estate is profiting from that. And so, this can only be a good thing. And King Charles has made it very clear that he's planning on trimming the royal estate spending, and he's trying to keep it in line with the fact that the country is going through a cost of living crisis. And so, things like extravagant spending is not something that's going to be on the books. He's trimming down a lot of working royals as well. So clearly, there is an element of really reading the room and understanding where the public is at. Most people in this country do support the monarchy, but there are limits to that. That you have to be an institution that reflects the values of the public, and I think the king is doing that very well.
And I think that really is the point, isn't it? It is a really good news story because the more self-sufficient they are, the less they're open to criticism.
Absolutely, exactly, and that's the point that many people have been making. It's not just this idea that they're a bunch of wealthy people that are funded by the government or effectively by the taxpayer. They are ambassadors for this country. The king is our head of state, and we have a duty to protect them as well as they have a duty to best represent the country. So I think sometimes it's unfair, the argument Republicans make that the royal family just costs this country an arm and a leg. They also do bring a lot of money into the country in the form of tourism and investment. So it's important to have a balanced view in that way.
Now, our next story is one that I'm not quite sure why it took so long to hit the press, but it's been reported that when the Queen passed away, Harry and Meghan asked for a lift back from the UK on Air Force One, but they were denied. So what happened here, and why did it take this story so long to surface?
Well, sources are claiming that the White House allegedly refused the Sussexes access to Air Force One to fly back to the US with President Joe Biden because they didn't want to ruffle any feathers. Obviously, we knew that at the time that they came to the country, it was only for the Queen's funeral. There was still a bit of there still is bad blood between, King Charles, William and Harry. But, at the time that very much existed as well. And we could obviously tell from the walk around that the Sussexes did with, now the Prince and Princesses of Wales, it was extremely awkward. You could see that, Catherine kind of kept her distance as well. So you can understand why the White House wouldn't want to ruffle any feathers and get involved in the whole royal family saga. But of course, these are just reports. The Sussexes haven't confirmed anything and they haven't spoken to this, but it wouldn't be very surprising. I suppose it's their version of sort of green, efficient car sharing, except instead of sharing a car, you're sharing a very luxurious plane back to the US. I find that very strange, but it's not something that would be out of character for the Sussexes.
Now, we've spoken previously on this show about how Spare has been a #1 bestseller, but it turns out it's also the most discarded book.
Yes, according to a tourism company, there have been over 100 copies of Spare left in hotels, on beaches, in restaurants, and all sorts of sort of holiday resorts. And so what it looks like is the hype and the sensationalism behind the book is dying down. Now, we obviously understand why the book became a bestseller. This was completely out of the ordinary. What was at one point a third in line to the throne was now writing a sensationalist book about his traumatic experiences in the royal family, according to his account of the matter. And people were interested. People wanted to know what Prince Harry had to say. But eventually it dawned on people that it was a very empty book. It sounded like a bit of a whinge fest. It was actually fairly expensive. I mean, even before it hit the shelves, it was already, I think in some shops, 50% off. So, the publishers and commercial vendors knew what to expect. But the reality is that it was just sensationalist hype, and that hype will eventually die down. This is a book of very little consequence. Nobody's really going to be remembering Prince Harry's book Spare 100 years from now as some sort of grand piece of non-fiction. So we have to bear that in mind. At the end of the day, it's just his account of what happened. There are always, three sides to every story, one side, the other side, and the truth. And unfortunately, two of those three sides are missing, and we'll never find out. So I think people are starting to understand why taking the word of someone like Prince Harry at face value can be unwise.
Now, there's an increasing number of reports, and it has been that way over the last few months, about how Harry's distancing himself from old friends. We've had another such report this week. So who is it this time, and what are the observations that have been made?
So it's no surprise that the Prince Harry has been distancing himself from all things sort of royal related. He apparently doesn't have much contact with his advisors that he relied heavily on when he was still a working member of the royal family, the likes of Tiggy Legbourne. And he also didn't attend his best man's wedding. Now, we don't understand why. I can't imagine he's had a falling out with every single one of these people. I think it's more of a general strategy of the fact that he wants to distance himself from the firm and from his royal life as much as possible. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I think, obviously, the biggest victims of the whole sort of Sussex royal family drama are the Sussex children, because they effectively are cut off from one half of their own identity. And I still find it very strange that even though Harry and Meghan effectively have a very little relationship with the royal family, they still chose to give their kids the titles, which suggests some sort of commercial interest. I don't know, but I find that very strange and actually quite disrespectful. But the reality is Prince Harry has been distancing himself from Britain in general and anything to do with his life as a working royal for a while. And I think it's sad, but it's not surprising.
No, you're quite right. And look, it must be getting to the stage where there is really little connection left. I mean, we can't know that for sure. But obviously that there is going to make any sort of mediation or reconnection with his family and his former friends more difficult as time goes on.
Absolutely. And, I don't want to speculate. And obviously, I think divorce and separation is a horrible thing. But, things do happen in life, and you do have times where you're down on your luck or something really traumatic has happened and you need the support of your friends and your family. I just hope that Prince Harry does have that, because at the end of the day, if you choose to cut yourself from your entire family, regardless of what has happened, you do have to recognize the fact that when times are hard, you effectively lack that social support that you would have relied on in the past. Now, he often cites the fact that his relationship with his family were far from perfect even before he left the firm. But at the end of the day, King Charles and Prince William are his father and brother, and I think it's a shame, especially after the passing of his mother, that he has a very little, what looks like not amicable relationship with the two of them.
Now, we know the UK has rules around how royal references are used in business and in the community, and there are apparently strict rules for pubs wanting to refer to the Queen. What are the requirements, and who manages these things, Esther?
So according to the Cabinet Office, there are sort of guidelines and permits you have to apply to use any sort of memorabilia of the Queen, especially where commercial interests are concerned. Now, obviously, there is a small caveat if the reason for you having to invoke, QE2 on any sort of business or any sort of venture that you have is not for commercial gain, then you can just go through the normal process of kind of getting approval there. But if it's, something to do with having the Queen's face on your pub, for instance, or anything with a commercial interest, obviously you do need formal approval. And it's understandable because many people might want to pay tribute to the late Queen in various ways, but I think it would be extremely distasteful if we saw the face of the Queen at the top of a strip club, for instance. And some people might have an odd sense of humour about it. But the reality is she is a former head of state, and it's the responsibility of the government to protect her reputation and the reputation of the royal family more broadly. So it's understandable. I just imagine that there will be a bit of a, administrative backlog going there, which is very typical of Britain.
And it's also been reported that government ministers are asking the public for suggestions of fitting ways to honour the late Queen and her 70 years of service. What sort of things have been suggested, and are there any concerns?
Yes, there have been waves of suggestions from, how to best remember the Queen, the concern, I would say, is doing it properly and doing it in the most respectful way possible and doing it in a way that honors her, 70 plus years of service. And that's the real issue. I mean, some of the memorabilia of Princess Diana came under fire for apparently being ugly or not being done properly or not being done respectfully. And so there are concerns around that. But obviously, this is not something that's going to be rushed into. Everyone still remembers the Queen. She's still a globally well-known figure. And while suggestions will be pouring in, it's important for them to be as well. What the final suggestions that are taken on board, it's important for them to be as respectful and as appropriate as possible. But I've heard some very interesting suggestions.